Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Creation Myths. So, before we go any further, let me just make sure YouTube has this working correctly. I always like to see and hear myself, which I do. That sounds terrible. I like to see and hear myself, but you know what I mean. So, folks, welcome back. I've been looking forward to this show for a few weeks now. So, joining me tonight, as you can see, Dr. Chris Thompson.
Hello.
We had a delightful conversation a few weeks ago over on Chris's channel in advance of a debate that he had with the one, the only Mr. Kent Hovind.
Yeah.
And then
I feel
he
a
had
little
the debate.
dirty still from that, honestly.
It's just icky,
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
icky. So then that debate happened, and we all watched it in spite of ourselves. And now we're here to talk about the debate. We want to talk about how it went, some stuff that jumped out, some kind of things that we want to highlight about how that debate went. So before we go any further, let me just say, Chris, welcome. It was a pleasure. Please take a
You.
moment, introduce yourself, and plug your channel, which I have linked down below,
Great.
and everybody should subscribe.
Please. Yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes. So I'm Chris Thompson. I'm an assistant professor of neuroscience at Virginia Tech. I bit of my research is on basically environmental toxicology and how it affects the developing brain. I My background is in all kinds of aspects of sort of behavioral neuroscience. So I used to work with songbirds and I used to work with honeybees when I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois. And that's where I got my degree in ecology, ethology, and evolution, which is where my kind of passion for evolution percolated. But it's that degree program was ecology, ethology, and evolution. So there are three things that we had to study, right? And I went into the program thinking I was going to study evolutionary biology, but then I started to take ethology classes. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's the study of animal behavior. And I became interested in that. And I was just, I'm not wedded to having to study it in one particular kind of animal model. I've worked in all kinds of animal models, but yeah, that's where my interest shifted somewhat into better understanding how the brain works and animal behavior, and then hormones and behavior is a big part of what I've worked on over the years. And now I work on endocrine disruption type mechanisms and how it affects the developing brain. Well, then my channel though is I've got a bunch of stuff on neuroscience. I do, I've got a bunch of lectures that I put up on my channel. So if you're interested in learning some, if looking at some of my lectures and hearing about that, you can get that material there. But I also do these debates too. So I've debated quite a bit on young Earth creationism. I've done debates on. I did a recent debate on modern day debates with Austin Whitsitt on the whether we should be fluoridating our water or not. That was an incredibly frustrating debate, to say the least. But for anyone who knows who he is, he's a very notorious flat earther, who was one of the handful of flat earthers that was picked to go to Antarctica for the final experiment. And he still apparently believes that the Earth is flat, despite that
despite having witnessed.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
At least Jaron, of Jaronism changed his mind. But so yeah, I've always been interested in skepticism and fighting back against ridiculous crap like flat earthism, which I never, back when I got into skepticism as in high school and as a graduate, an undergrad and a graduate student, we always thought of flat earthism as sort of this kooky thing that obviously no one could ever possibly believe in, but here we are in our era.
Chris, that would be like believing that the world is 6,000 years old. Like,
yes.
How could anybody think that in the 21st century?
I get that. It is sad the direction and way we're going. I've got a really funny story about that, in fact. So when I was a graduate student at the University of Washington in Seattle, and not that we should get too far off track, but this is a pretty funny story. I got involved with the Pacific Northwest Skeptic Society. I was kind of their resident, like, pro-evolution guy, teaching people about creationism. I gave talks at various events that they did. And because in Seattle, that's where the Discovery Institute is located, which is sort of at least especially at that time, the crucible for fostering intelligent design. we would go to events and try to keep track of things and send reports to the National Center for Science Education.
Oh, doing the Lord's work out there.
I was very heavily involved with a lot of that stuff. And but this one, the head of the society, he told me about this. He was really great. He probably was a CIA agent, like on the down low. I'm pretty sure he was really good at like infiltrating various groups. So he would just go to these groups and ingratiated himself with like this kind of young Earth creationist group that would meet, and he'd go to their meetings. And like they would never ask like, hey, what's up with you? And he became friendly with them, and it was led by this like old fart who I forget his name now, but he was sort of involved with young Earth creationism at the time as a more senior person. But he's like, okay, Pierre, come with me. I got some things that I want to show you. And so he took him down into his basement, and he's like, what is this old man going to be showing me? Like, what kind of dirty magazines is he going to have down there? And he's like, I've got some really good stuff for you. And he pulls out these like old pamphlets, and it was like geocentrism and flat Earth pamphlets. And he's like, these are the things that like the people upstairs, they don't like it when I bring these out, but I can tell that you're a true believer. And so
amazing.
Like, this was on the down low.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he was a prominent young earther, but then also like when if he ever had like a booth at, like a fair, he'd have the special box of the flat earth stuff.
About hiding it, right? He couldn't have it out, right?
Right.
Because
but
it was so shameful to admit that you believe in the flat earth. But that's the thing about flat earth and then it's something that came up many times with my debate with Kent, is that he says he doesn't believe in the flat earth, and so like he obviously doesn't take the Bible literally. So sure,
amazing,
right? It's just metaphor, right? The ends of the earth, that's just a metaphor. So right, he's got his limits too. But anyway, so let's see where to go. With Kent, so I've got a little bit of history. If we could kind of cover that a little bit, I don't remember if we talked about this.
Let me just pause for one moment,
sure,
and then I want to hear the history
with
Kent, because we got a super chat here from Michael Curtis for $5. Thank you, Michael. I have paid you, so now you are a professional anti-creationist. And this is for folks who don't know. I'm in the middle of let's call it a conversation with Dr. Rob Carter. And I forget if somebody chat remind me of what he said. Dedicated anti-creationist. I forget the word that he used, but I referred to him as a professional creationist, and then he called me, I think, a dedicated anti-creationist. But and a few people were ragging on me because he didn't call me a professional back, as though like I'm not a professional. And so now that I have been paid for my service, I am now a professional anti-creationist. And Michael, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right.
So your history. So you're coming out of the Northeast, dealing with Discovery Institute, which
Northwest, but
Northwest.
Yes.
And to be clear for everybody, Discovery Institute pretends to be a pro-intelligent design science think tank. What they actually are is a Christian nationalist think tank that moonlights as a fake science organization. And there's a paper trail a mile long and just decades of history. We don't have to go into it here, but that's what they are.
But if anyone's interested, just look up the Wedge document.
There you go. Which, by the way, that was like supposed to be like 5 years ago. They were supposed to have taken over at that point. So
is that right? That was the timeline.
It was 20 years, and it was 1999 or whatever, and it was supposed to be 20 years, and here we are.
Well, they're only delayed by 5 years.
Okay, so you're coming out of the Northwest. You've dealt with this stuff, and so then Kent.
Yeah. So in fact, actually, that's where my introduction to Kent started. Obviously, he's been notorious for a long time within the evolution community and the creation community too. Back then, he was seen as this pariah as well, as like a charlatan and a clown. I mean, he was certainly the bane of the existence of like intelligent design people, because he's very overt about the crazy things that he believes, whereas intelligent design proponents don't want to talk about the age of the Earth, and they certainly aren't going to want to talk about the Ark or some of the stupid things that Kent will say, which are even stupid as far as young Earth creationists are concerned. But he was giving this 2 days of lectures at this Russian language church just south of Seattle, And me and a friend, we both went down to both days, listened to him for like where he basically went through all of
All
his.
stuff.
Yes, it was
Oof.
insane. And it was all the weird conspiracy. So a lot of it was like, of course, just every single lecture. It was so boring. It's so difficult to sit there and listen to him for 10 minutes, let alone like 8 hours.
And the slides are god awful. Like,
Yes,
someone, can we get some graphic design in there? Edward Tofty, please go help this man.
they're
Like,
still the same.
they're
Like
the
they're
same.
still largely the same from even back then. So, but like he also has a bunch of wacky, crazy conspiracy stuff, and that was some of the more interesting lectures because it wasn't about creationism. It was stuff that obviously I don't know that Kent talks about this. He's obviously kind of involved with sovereign citizen kind of
Yep.
crap.
Oh
But
yeah.
he believes in that there's going to be the mark of the beast. So I remember this slide that he had of this like guy who had like the UPC code on his forehead, and that's going to be the mark of the beast. But he also spoke favorably about the protocols of the elders of Zion,
Uh-huh.
which
Oh
is
yeah.
the yes. So he's a Pez head, and so he thinks that the protocols of the elders of Zion, which for those who don't know, hopefully most of us know, but for those that don't know, it's this fraudulent document that was composed in the late 1800s. Clearly fraudulent, but it was supposed to be this sort of transcription of Jewish elders on their plot to take over the world, and then was used though by anti-Semitic groups, most notably the Nazis, to promote the genocide of Jews. And it's but yeah, and even at that time, it was known as fraudulent, but they don't
Didn't
care.
stop
Like that's the
anybody.
thing about fascists; they
I mean,
just
Henry Ford was a giant promoter of it,
yeah,
had
right,
thousands and thousands of copies printed and distributed. And
yeah,
yeah, it
that's
was a
right,
whole thing. And,
sure,
it's a little bit adjacent to what we're doing, but it's actually not, because at its heart, and I've talked about this, at its heart, creationism is a conspiracy theory, right?
yes,
If it is true that the world was created 6,000 or 10,000 or at all, right, and the scientific community is hiding that fact, right, creationism is a conspiracy theory alleging that there's millions of people involved in suppressing this knowledge. And if you dig downwards from any conspiracy theory, whether it's young earth creationism or anti-vax stuff, chemtrails, this, that, the other thing, you always, always, always end up at anti-Semitism.
yep,
Always.
mhm,
That it is the conspiracy theory behind all the rest of
yep,
them. And so it is not a coincidence that somebody like Kent, whose public facing thing is a very specific form of young earth creationism, it even sets him apart from like AIG, but a very specific form of young earth creationism, it is not surprising that behind all of that, when you really peel back the layers, you end up with anti-Semitism. And
yep,
we've got videos just from the last few years of
yes.
him, like every now and then the mask slips and he says something.
Right.
You
I've
know,
got
he'll
a short on my channel of Kent calling Jews very evil people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can hear it when he says it, capital T, capital J, right?
Oh
The
yes.
Jew, like you can
Oh, Jew.
hear the capital letters when he says it.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's very specific.
Yeah,
And
and you're absolutely right. Obviously, I totally agree that young Earth creationism is a form of conspiracy theory for the reason that you said, but also one other thing that conspiracy theories always have is that it's always looking to prove its conclusion um without actually based on evidence and taking the totality of all of the evidence. It's entirely confirmation biased, right? So you have your conclusion.
yep.
The Earth has to be 6,000 years old. And so then you go into the world and you ignore and destroy and suppress anything that doesn't support your worldview. And you pick the tiny little bits and try to cobble it together into some sort of golem that is the thing that would support your worldview. And right, that's all conspiracy theories operate in that same way. It's utterly just built upon confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the way anti-Semitism works as well, right?
Yep.
Like clearly, to believe the things that like the protocols of the elders of Zion believes, you have to have that kind of mindset of
Yep.
confirmation bias that you already have drawn the conclusion that Jews are evil, they're trying to take over the world, and that and that they have this vast conspiracy to control us all. It's nuts.
So that brings us,
yes. So to this debate.
That brings us to you debating about the evolution of Order Carnivora.
Right.
Very specific topic.
Very specific.
Before I ask, I'm going to ask how in the world did that happen? Let me get to this super chat right here from My Unfinished Journey for $2.22. Hail Nero, Doctors Dan and Chris, and hail Pro Anti-Yex. Thank you. I appreciate your generosity, My Unfinished Journey. Thank you.
Very nice.
So Kent very famously has done a bajillion debates. And if you go back through his catalog, if you are a glutton for punishment, and I'm not saying I have done this, but I have definitely done this, you'll see that the topics tend to be things like, is there evidence for evolution, or evolution versus creation? And he likes to do those giant, broad topics. So how did you end up on this hyper-specific Order Carnivora? Like, how did that happen? Because that A+, that was a great move.
Great, thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, that it was going to be contingent. If I was going to do it, it'd have to be on something like that. The reason, okay, so Kent he will never ever debate on something like, did the biblical flood happen, or was there a Garden of Eden, or are we all descended from Adam and Eve? And it's obvious why he won't do that. It's because he's snide, he is persnickety, and he doesn't actually really care about evidence or proving things to be true. He likes to tear things down in a nasty, abrasive way. So he always loves to be on the offense. He doesn't like to defend any position. And when I reached out to Donnie, or Donnie reached out to me about debating Kent, he was like, well, what kind of topics? So I gave him some, like, well, let's see if he defends these. And he's like, well, actually, Kent, he doesn't like to take the affirmative. He wants to take, the opposite position. So I was like, okay, well, that obviously means I'm going to have to be defending something. And I get it. Like, I also want to attack in a debate. And I don't want to have to sit there and defend, because you don't win things by just being on defense for the most part. Now, if I don't mind a balanced approach to a debate. That's fine. If it's something like evolution versus creation, or, did common descent or common design, like if it's a proposed, like, okay, we both got to take positions, we both have to defend things. These things are obviously incompatible with each other. So let's talk it out. That's great. If I have to defend, like, say, abiogenesis, which can be done, for instance, I think if Grayson had to take on that debate, he would do a fantastic job.
Oh, right? Yeah. He knows that inside out, yes, and he would do really excellent.
Does. Like, and he's really good at debating, and he knows all the young earth creationist arguments, intelligent design arguments. He would nail that out of the park. Me, I'm not, I don't know abiogenesis nearly as well as he does. And if I had to be drawn into a debate like that, that would be hard for me. So but if I had to, as I did a modern day debate topic on intelligent design. And it was supposed to be like, is intelligent design real? So I was like, sure, I'm happy to take that on. I could tear intelligent design a new hole, and not a problem. But the people I was debating, the one person, I forget her name now, but she's kind of nuts. But anyway, she wanted to turn it into, no, you have to defend abiogenesis. And I had to keep trying to, the whole debate was me dragging her back. No, we're talking about intelligent design. We're not talking about abiogenesis. You're here to defend this. And so anyway, that got me to, like, all right, well, I'm going to have to take the affirmative. So I need to make it specific. And I wanted to use it as a place where I could force Kent to then have to address things that I haven't seen too many young earth creationists have to face anyway. And I certainly haven't seen him deal with this in any sort of way whatsoever. So I picked the Order Carnivores because he often says, well, dogs only give birth to dogs, right? And cats give birth to cats. Well, okay, those are all groups of carnivores. Carnivores that's an order, and below that are 16 families. And in general, many young earth creationists, many prominent young earth creationist groups define kinds at the family level. Now, they've just kind of picked that arbitrarily, right? Like there's no real logic or reason for it, but they got to pick something. Yes.
It's got to be some evolution because there's
Uh-huh.
fossils after the flood, but how many
Yes.
things could fit on the ark, right? There's
Exactly.
like kind of these,
Deal with
you
that.
know, concerns that they're kind of nodding towards pretending to care if some idea
Yes.
is feasible, even though at the
Exactly.
end of the day, like we're arguing over the logistics of a wooden boat surviving a flood at temperatures that would convert the crust to plasma. How many
Just skipped over
animals we
that
could
part.
fit on the boat is not the thing that we need to
The thing
like
that we got to worry
hammer
about.
out, right? It's not
Right.
the logistically challenging part of that
That's right.
narrative.
Yes. So even if you grant the fact that they wouldn't be turned to plasma, um, which obviously with the heat problem, that is a significant problem. They still have to wrestle with the fact that all right, they've done these calculations about the number of animals that are going to be on the ark, fossils after the flood, all this stupid stuff. Because many of them they'll I don't know. It's kind of weird. They'll often say that the Cenozoic fossil record is entirely after the flood. Is that right?
Yeah, so a lot of I think so there's not a strong consensus on
No,
who puts
really
the
is.
flood boundary where.
Yeah.
To the extent there's kind of a most popular point, it's the KPG boundary, the KT
Okay.
boundary with the dinosaurs, right? That's
Yes.
the end. So then everything above that is going to be post flood,
Right.
which I love when they do that because that means we have all of 400 years to do a whole lot of speciation and generate a whole
Yes.
lot of fossils.
It's
And
nuts to
and
think.
folks, I say 400 rather than 4,000 because you don't get the whole time since the flood to do it. You get until Middle Kingdom Egypt if we're being generous,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
right there.
Absolutely. Yes.
So,
Right.
and it's a little shameless self promotion here. I'm gonna have a video on that soon.
Oh, great.
That's
Good.
coming soon. I'm
Good.
specifically doing hyper speciation.
Yes. So
It's
that
ridiculous.
actually brings me to one of the reasons why I picked this is because if they believe that there was just a single male and a single female dog kind on the ark, that all of the biodiversity within the dog kind, we call them canids, would have to have evolved, like you said, within about 400 years or less, because we know that these species existed way back then. Gosh, and if you have to include the Cenozoic animals, I mean, there's so many different carnivore morpha, carnivore-like animals, like that don't fall into carnivores, but are clearly not any of the extant species. So now you're talking about dozens and dozens of other additional
Mhm.
species. That's wild. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So just to give an
very
example of
problematic.
this, so there's the example of this that I know is actually the cat. So there's 30 something extant species within family Felidae, but there are over 100 extinct species in the rocks that if you use the KPG boundary as the flood boundary, there's over 100 extinct species you also have to account for. So you're 120, 130, 140 species in the span of 400 years
Yes.
if you're being generous with your time frame. It's
Massive
yeah.
speciation, and it's not just different species. One of the ways that we can, of course, know that there are 100 extinct species of cats is that they have substantially different morphology than the ones
Yes.
that we see today. Like they're clearly distinct, different species, right? They're different enough where, yes, these are obviously different species. And that's certainly true also with the canids as well. I don't know how many extinct species of canids that you're going to find, but it's a lot. There's quite a bit of variability. Same for bear. I mean, all of them, right? So
Mhm.
you can go through all of them. I mean, you might run into maybe not quite as many species being fossilized in some of the smaller families. Like the mustelids those are relatively small canid-like animals. They're the dog-like. They include the weasels, the otters, the badgers, and there's 57 extant species. So living today, there's 57 different species of those today. And I know that there are fossil species in mustelids, but probably not as many because they're kind of,
But
smaller
even if there's
animals
a
don't
few
fossilize as well, right?
even if there's a few dozen though. I mean,
Yes. Oh, of
still
course. And there
forget
certainly
about
are.
them,
We know that for a fact. Like
Yeah.
that there are definitely extinct species of mustelids. So
So
it's true
with
for every single one of these 16 species. So it forces then him to address that if we're talking about evolution of carnivores, we both agree that carnivores have evolved, right? But where do we draw the
where do
line
we draw
on
the
where they
line?
can no longer be connected? Now, that is one place where I didn't really connect the dots as well in the debate as I'd hoped. I'm actually planning on making a video on that, on connecting those dots a little bit better and talking more about the fossil record, which I just didn't get into at all during my debate.
It's funny that you say that, because I thought one of the highlights of the debate was when you went through kind of the continuum and were like, dogs and wolves, we agree.
Yes.
Dogs, wolves, coyotes, da, 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 da. And at some point, it was like, okay, Kent, you clearly have no idea what you're actually defending, right? So you were able to switch gears and go on offense and say, you're saying at some point this falls apart. Where is that line? If you can't tell me where the line is, what business do you have saying there's a line in the first place?
Yes. Now, I wish I had made that more explicitly clear. I think I got diverted in the conversation when I was trying to get to that point. But you're right. Like, that was the goal in having him take the phylogeny challenge, which is the thing that Arn Ra has kind of popularized. But it's just the nature of taxonomy that if you have three groups of animals, or three individual animals from different species, or even three individuals within the same species, inevitably you're going to have two that are more similar to each other than the third. And then, of course, when you get across species, that's where there's always going to be two that are more similar to each other compared to a third. So that's the nature of taxonomy and coming up with a phylogenetic tree. And he obviously doesn't understand that. That's one of the things that was so frustrating about this debate is that, like, he still talks about taxonomic trees as just lines on a page. Like, dude, you think that there are 34 species alive today of dogs that are of dog-like species that are, that you think all descended from a common ancestor. So you believe in these trees. You know that that's obviously that's how it has to work. So I forced him to have to reconcile that. And sure, I appreciate you appreciating that. But
I think that part landed. I mean, look, I'm biased because I saw from the beginning exactly where that was going. I knew exactly what you were doing, and I knew where it was going, and it was great because it's like you said, if you just have to defend something, it puts you in a tricky position. But now you flip the script, literally, because he doesn't have thoughts; he just has a script, and you're now making him think outside of his comfort zone and having to defend an idea that he has not actually thought of.
Exactly.
Which is a key thing with Kent. You just got to break out of that script that he has.
Exactly. So, would you like to look at that part in the debate? I could show the slides.
So let me first pull this up. We've got a super chat for $4.99 from Roshina. I'm going to remember that, how to pronounce your name now. It's Roshina Pre-Yiddish Uranium Decay Keller. These inside joke names are getting way out of hand. Now we're hybridizing the inside jokes into multiple things. So Roshina says, also, Kent is about tearing other people down. He can't defend his own beliefs. He's not an apologist. Yes.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yes. That is spot on. And
that's why you have to go in prepared. If you are going to debate Kent, you have to know that he will be attacking as much as possible. He's got a script. I guess if you watch enough of his debates, you'll know what the script is, and you could come up with counters for that. Or you can kind of do what I did, which is take him off of his script, put him into a place where he now is forced to actually defend. And that's what I did. I took the debate I'm defending the evolution of carnivores. Actually, no, I'm going to force you to sit down and tell me what the hell a kind is and reconcile with the fact that, your model cannot explain the biodiversity even within a kind. And that you have to accept that the methods that we use to distinguish different species or to tell whether two species are more closely related to each other than they are to a third within a kind is the same method that we use across kinds, right?
Bingo.
And there's no distinction between those things.
I will say, for anyone who hasn't watched the debate, I've linked it down in the description on Dr. Chris's channel. So when you go there, you should also make sure you hit subscribe. One thing you will notice is, so Kent always likes to go second, right? He wants the other person to go first, and then he can do his shtick in response, oh, that's stupid. You think blah, 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 right? That's just what he does. Well, one thing that if you watch his opening in this debate, he didn't know what to do. There's a spot about a minute into his opening, it's pretty early in his opening, where he says the same sentence almost word for word about 30, 40 seconds apart. He says it, and then he kind of like drifts off in one direction. Then he's like, no, I don't want to go that way. And then he goes back and like starts again and goes in a different direction with it. He didn't know what to do because it wasn't a evolution or creation. Is there evidence for evolution? And he couldn't just say, no, there isn't. That's stupid, right? He had to like try. You could see the wheels turning. You see that hamster like running real fast up there, like trying to think, okay, do I have anything to respond to this specifically? And the answer ultimately was no.
Yeah.
Because he ended up doing the same thing, but he had this false start where he started one way and he started it with dogs only give birth to dogs. And then he kind of went and started talking. And then he looped back around and said, dogs only give birth to dogs again. And then he went a different way from there. And that's funny, not just because he said the same sentence. Well, like he did the Marco Rubio shorting out during the debate. Like if anybody remembers that from 2015 or whatever that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the right before New Hampshire or whatever. And
yes.
Yeah. Everyone should go and watch that moment.
It's a fantastic moment.
Glorious.
He called him out on.
It was glorious. But so Kent had one of those like short circuit moments. But then the other thing that's funny about the fact that he shorted out on that exact line is that that line was actually the point of the debate. Mm-hmm. Dogs only give birth to dogs. Yes, exactly. That's the point of making sure we're only talking about carnivores. So we agree, all the dogs are a single kind.
Right.
Gee, Kent, that's an awful lot of evolution. That seems like more evolution than you're comfortable with. So are we sure about that?
Yeah. And the other thing about this topic, the forcing it on carnivores, is that even within kind, I hate calling it that, but within a family, like the canids, but we can look at other examples too, but certainly within the canids, there's interesting biodiversity where obviously animals that have been under different selection pressures have diverged in radically different ways and have novelty in their overall morphology and behavior. The example that I also brought up in the debate is the comparison between the bush dog and the Maine wolf, which is just utterly fascinating.
That's the one with the really long legs, right?
Yes, the Maine wolf has
the
super long legs, like kind of fluffy, weird fur, which is why it's called the maned wolf. It has these really, really long legs, and it gets 50% of its calories from eating fruit. So it has this, it's co-evolved this relationship with something called the wolf apple, whereas the bush dog is its most genetically similar.
It's the sister group.
It's the sister group, exactly. And it's very different. It's actually sort of squat. It has webbed feet because it lives in marshy areas and kind of swims a lot, and is hypercarnivorous, which means that it almost entirely eats meat. And it does not, like many canids actually are more, they're largely carnivorous, but they are a little bit more omnivorous in their diets. Like they can eat other things.
Right. They can accommodate if
they can accommodate
food is in short supply. They're not going to starve if they only have, you know.
Whereas the felines, most of them typically are hypercarnivorous. But the bush dog is the one example of being hypercarnivorous, whereas the Maine wolf has actually this utterly bizarre diet that's largely dependent upon fruit. And they are sister species.
Yeah.
So they definitely obviously shared a common ancestor. Creationists would have to believe that as well, right? Because they're so genetically similar. That's the other thing. And that's the thing also about a point that you often like to make, and I think often gets lost in discussions about evolution, is that genetics trumps morphology. It has to, right?
Always.
Yes, right? Because, you know, and that was one of the things about figuring out the taxonomy of canids for a long time before we had genetics. If you go look at like the old the phylogenetic trees of canids from 60, 70 years ago, like it looks a lot different than it does today, because we just didn't know like that there could be such substantial morphological change that can occur in a relatively short period of time. Like, you know, the bush dog was considered in a totally different group from the Maine wolf. And it turns out that they're very, very similar to each other. And so you don't, so that you can get novelty. That's the other thing, is that you can actually get morphological novelty that has to evolve via natural selection. And the natural selection isn't simply just like picking the junk and, because like I want to say that all animals are front loaded with all the genetic information that you need. clearly that's not the case, right? Like we know that that's not the case. That cannot be the case because of issues like with orphan genes and new genes. Like that's the other thing that we're now learning now that we can do whole genome sequencing with these animals. So there's so much that's just about this group of animals, the carnivores and canids especially, that just it debunks the young earth creationism position completely. That's why I picked it.
And the other aspect of this that you touched on really effectively, I thought, with specifically the South American canids, is the biogeography of the fossil record and how they were restricted to North America and then were able to move. So even if you constrain kind of the real, fossil record to a narrow band of rocks, right? You still have to contend with the fact that on one continent, there are dogs throughout those layers, and on another continent, there aren't. And then at some point, there begin to be dogs.
That's right.
Also, that point in time corresponds with when the two continents physically became accessible to each other. And it's quite a coincidence if all of this diversity is not the result of evolution. Those are quite a series of coincidences now that have accumulated.
Right. It simply just can't be explained as coincidences. Yes. To just reiterate your point, and I didn't make this clear in the debate because we didn't talk about the fossil record too much in the debate. But yeah, for the canids, like there's an extensive fossil record in North America going back around 30 million years. So there's 30 million years where you can find many different. Yes, I know, million years, right? You say that, but it's just not true.
There's 4,400 years.
4,400 years.
So, but there's only 2,000 years in South America.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, so those you can also look at the same aged rocks in South America, and you do not see canids. Like they were not there at all until like I think the earliest ones that they find are 3.5 million years ago, which is just kind of a blink of the eye in evolution. But within 3.5 million years of the canids making their way into South America, you had the Great American Interchange, is what it's called. And all of a sudden, now you have canids in South America. They outcompeted the other species that were there. And fascinatingly, there were a bunch of these very large carnivorous hunting marsupials in South America. They were really bizarre. Yeah, so they like saber-tooth like teeth, but they were marsupials.
Well, they're marsupials, yeah.
Yes. And they got outcompeted by these new canids that came in and went extinct. But then they diversified. And because obviously South America is a huge continent, it's very diverse, big tall mountains, the Amazon, you've got plains, you've got desert. Right. So there's lots of different environments for those animals to then sort of make their way into, and different environments are going to have different selective pressures on different groups of animals, where then that's going to obviously drive novelty in morphology. And then you get obviously the coevolution relationships that occur when that happens, because you have to take into account the ecological habitat that those animals are moving into. So that's where you get this very strange but fascinating relationship of the Maine wolf and the wolf apple. And that they co-evolve, where now the main wolf is like now the major distributor of wolf apple seeds, right? Because it's evolved this relationship, right?
Which is super cool, and
it's amazing.
And you only have so much time for that relationship to evolve in a young Earth paradigm. And you said something really interesting that I want to highlight for everybody with the timing of all this. In the real world, right? It's 30 million years of a fossil record in North America, and it's 3 million years in South America. So that's a 10-to-1 ratio.
Yep.
Now, if we condense that into a young Earth timeline, the flood ends about 4,400 years ago, right? So now if that's our 30 million year benchmark, we have a tenth of that. We have less than 500 years worth of history of canids in South America. Mm-hmm. 500. Think about that. Less than 500 years of dogs in South America. Let's be generous and let's give them, let's say that's not the ratio. Let's, fudge the numbers a little bit. Let's say it's just a 2-to-1. You're telling me there were no wolves in South America? There were no dogs in South America? None? No canids at all until 2,000 years ago? That's the type of nonsense you have to accept if this is the position you're going to argue.
Yep.
And this is, again, I want to bring this back to the tactical aspect of debating Kent. Now you've backed him into a corner where these are the bananas implications of the thing he is arguing. Now he has to defend this silliness if he's going to defend his point of view, which again, he's not. He's just going to call you stupid because he's a jerk and ask you if you think you came from a banana. But if he's going to defend his point of view, these are the implications of it if you follow the logic, which... Why are we just no?
Yep. So that was the idea. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which for my money, I think it was really effective. I think that was really effective because again, it had him on the defensive throughout the debate. And I want to point out one consequence. I want to change gears a little bit and point out a consequence of that happened over and over again. And I think you know what I'm alluding to. But first, we have another super chat from Rashina, pre-Yiddish uranium decay. I'm going to laugh every time I read that name. Speaking of front-loading genetic diversity, no matter how many wolf pairs you mate, you'll never get the phenotypes of a Chihuahua because they're just not natural variations of F1 wolves. This is a great point. Yes, and I want to just take a minute to explain why this is so cool. So traditionally in genetics, if you go back to Gregor Mendel and the pea plants in the 1800s, you can set it up generation by generation where you have your pea generation, that's your parentals, and then you have your F1, your F2, and so on down the line. And this point is really important because if you don't have time to have many, many, many generations, if you have to condense all this evolution into a short amount of time, you're going to need to get very large steps within a single generation. In effect, you need to get like the fake version of evolution that creationists think we believe in. That's what they're actually proposing has to happen. So what Rashina is pointing out is that if you have two wolves in your P generation and they have kids, you're never going to get an F1 Chihuahua. You're never going to get an F1 maned wolf. You're never going to get all of this variation fast enough in the young Earth timeline. It's just not possible because even assuming you have all of the genetic variation that you need present, it's more than one step to allocate it into the specific combinations you need to get all these different things. And that's a great point. I really appreciate you taking the time to make this point because that is something that people should point out more frequently. That is a genuine difficulty with the young Earth model that does not get brought up. And I think the reason for that is that it's kind of a technical point. You have to what's an F1? What does that mean? Right. So it takes, and like Kent doesn't just straight through, right?
He clearly doesn't understand that.
Nothing.
There were many points in the debate where he kept talking about, well, if you have, if two parents have 50 kids, they're all going to look different. Like, do they though? That's not how that works.
So they're not right. You can't just It's akin to saying you're going to shuffle a deck of cards, right? Yes, there are many, many different hands you can get, but it's never going to. You're never going to deal a hand of go fish from that deck of cards, right? There needs to be
exactly. So I actually have a slide here that I had prepared. I don't think that I talked about it in the debate. I forget now. But this gets to that point. So this is this issue of private alleles, again, talking about the bush dog and the Maine wolf, right? So here we were talking about it. Is it showing up on your screen, the cursor? Yeah. No, it's not. Here.
Nope, your cursor's there.
There we are. Yes. Okay. So, right, this is what that Maine wolf looks like. So for those of you that aren't seeing it, it's just totally bizarre looking. And this is the bush dog. And these are sister species. So they are more similar to each other than any of them are to any other canid, right? So, but the thing is, there's this existence of private alleles that they did. So when they are going through and they're looking at the genome of these animals, they're seeing obviously small variations, but they see variations. But there's some variations that they find in only one species, not the other. And that means that obviously there must have been a mutation that ended up as a substitution, some sort of change that occurred that got fixed into the population that, of the ancestor, the bush dog, after they split from the Maine wolf. And then therefore now these are alleles that you're only going to find in the bush dog and not in any other species, including the Maine wolf. And of course, the Maine wolf has its own private alleles as well that you do not find in any other species of canid. And that you can't front load this. Like that cannot be front loaded in a pair of a male and a female on the ark where you get enough diversity in 34 different species, given everything that we know about the way genetics works and the way hereditary works.
Right. You
Yes.
you don't have you need
Variability.
so many variants of that
Yes.
specific locus in the genome, and you
Yes.
simply don't have them available on the arc to generate the diversity we observe as fast as you would need to generate it. Yeah.
Right.
Standing for Truth recently said that you could explain this because maybe that variation was present at different loci, which I think is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the genome works.
Yes.
Because if it's present at a different loci, then it's not the same thing.
Right.
And it's not just an allele of that gene.
No, it's not just an allele. They do not understand this.
Different thing. Yeah, and this is important for the broader question of kind of there's two reasons that point that each of these lineages has their own genes that are unique to them. One, there have been attempts by creationists to define kinds according to these private genes or orphan genes, whatever you want to call them. The problem is you could find orphan genes that are species specific, that are genus specific, family specific, order specific. So no matter where you draw that line, you're always going to have discontinuity in those orphan genes.
Exactly.
The other side of it, the other way you can try to get creationists is say, oh, it was all there, and then you've had deletions. So, like, you know, the maned wolf has its own alleles that lead to long legs. Everyone started with those, but they've been deleted in everybody in exactly the same way with no trace, no pseudogenes, no nothing.
Nope.
And only the maned wolf still has it. And I mean, good. Again, if you want to defend that position, you're welcome to it. Kent and any other yaks that want to do it, be my guest if that is your position. And again, the effect of this is to now turn the tables and back them into a corner where they're defending this bat poop idea that everyone can just like, that's dumb. Like, no, it didn't start with that gene and then I got deleted in everybody except that one. That didn't happen.
Utterly ridiculous to think that that's the case. I mean, obviously that's not parsimonious at all. And you know, we're talking about a private allele, right? So these are genes that obviously exist in all canids, but this is a variation of this gene that, you know, I don't know the details of all of these alleles, but it might just simply be a single nucleotide substitution that results in some, you know, single change in one amino acid out of the entire protein, but it's enough to induce a major change in the entire overall morphology of an animal. And, but then, you know, like they already agree that, well, I mean, you have to agree that mutations occur, that they can be passed down to descendants if they get fixed into the germline, that they can be fixed in populations, because obviously that's the case here. I mean, that's the most parsimonious conclusion that one can draw, and that if it's clearly associated with the overall morphology of this animal, that it had to have evolved, because these are all dogs. They're all dog-like animals.
Right. So I want to all of these points came up during the debate.
Yes, they did.
All of these, you know, the biogeography, the private genes, the this, the that, all of this stuff came up. And multiple times during the debate, Kent had a common response to this. And the response was, well, you think you're related to a plant. You think everything came to a rock. Yet again, like he went back to his tried and true script of, we're not going to talk about this. I'm going to make you defend everything. And multiple times, and it was just music to my ears. Every time I heard this, you were like, Kent, focus. We're not talking about rocks. We're not talking about plants. We're talking specifically about carnivores. Please stay on topic. And I loved that for a bunch of reasons. One, it highlighted that Kent was tap dancing and had nothing to say about the topic. It showed that he didn't actually like know the words. It's not just that it wasn't in his script. It's that he couldn't come up with anything to BS in the moment.
Right.
But also, and this is just me being a little bit petty, it was just the right amount of condescending. It was just right. It was just that little bit of like, come on, man. Like, come on.
We agreed to talk about something.
Well, like like Ken, do you remember that we agreed this was going to be the topic? Could you please try to stay on topic? Yeah, it was just a little hint was just the little spice on top that I needed in my life. It was
well, he's got the are you related to a tomato? Are you think you're related to a mosquito, a pine tree? So I had I'm not a giant fan of AI slop, but sometimes there are places where AI images could be fine. So I ended up creating this like family portrait of these people that are like, that's a whale. One woman has a pine tree as a head. There's like this big picture of a mosquito in the background, and this guy has this tomato as a head. And I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, I want to illustrate the point that like we're not. If every time Kent wants to talk about tomatoes and mosquitoes, I'm gonna have to redirect him. And he even brought out the big tree of life, which I also had the image of because I figured he'd probably bring it out, and I was so happy that
he showed the poster that I have.
Yes, exactly.
We have the same poster.
Of course, I had that as a puzzle. It was great. It's an excellent. I love it. I think it's a wonderful image, but it's like, hey, no, I highlighted on my slide. We're talking about this little part here, and then in his slide, he highlighted the humans. It's like, dude, I specifically said I'm not talking about that.
Nope.
But so frustrating. God.
It was such a great illustration of the fact that of what is an effective approach to dealing with Kent, which is keep the topic, like I really want to emphasize this, and you've been emphasizing this to great effect, keep the topic narrow, because his script is designed to debate, is there evidence for evolution? Is evolution true? Right? That's what he has built his whole shtick around. If you say, okay, let's talk about this particular thing, then he can do it.
Right.
And it's just watching him tap dance around to try to do that. And there were multiple moments of back on topic. There was is this thing a specific kind? And there was one time where you said, you said pretty specifically, this is your position. Like, just give me an answer. Like, just tell me, are these things actually related or not? Right.
Yes.
And he was like, well, I don't know.
I game planned out, like, using this topic, that I would try to take the reins of the conversation right at the get-go, and I did. And I try to make it sound as if like, oh, we actually are going to agree on a lot. So I want to, because obviously we
agree. They're related.
These things evolve. So let's talk about those things, because I want to hear him say it. Like, I want to hear him actually, because he hates having to say that, like, well, sure, natural selection can do certain things. And he had to admit that several times, including in like some unforced ways, like where he talked about how, well, if like humans have to get things out of trees, obviously the taller humans are going to be able to survive longer. And so you're going to have an evolution of people getting taller. Like, yeah, that's natural selection.
Great,
I mean, it's simplistic to put it that way, but right. That's
Great.
Exactly right. And that's novelty that can occur.
Let's put that in the agree column. Yes. Now let's apply that to other things. Now let's talk about the limit on that.
Right.
You're saying there's a limit. Where's the limit? Let's talk about that. And then you get to like, oh, well, a banana can't come from a wolf or whatever. And then, you can't have a dog the size of Texas. And
then it's right. Then obviously he's taking these absurd things to their, to ad absurdum. I wanted to show I put up my slide deck.
Yeah.
So this is like the level of preparation that I did to put into this. So this is just my introduction through here. And so I had 20 slides, but like, the way I kind of organize my slides is that I have like some slides that sort of turn into each other. And I was using an outline slide. I only had like 10 minutes, but Donnie was generous and gave me like 13 minutes and let me go over a little bit, so I didn't have to feel rushed through it. But then after that, like basically I wasn't too sure what topic that I would want to touch on, but I wanted to prepare myself to like hit on things, right? You have to prepare in advance for, and this is true with any younger creationist, let alone Kent. But you just got to prepare in advance, and you got to
prepared.
You got to have a script in mind of like the things that you think that you want to hit on. So if we were going to talk about genetics, I've got like a real simple description of like what is the genetic evidence, but how do we even know that? So some of this is like some of my own, like I didn't talk about this in the debate at all, but this is just to zoom in a little bit. This is like some stuff from my my own personal 23andMe account, right? Like we use genetics to tell our lineage all the time, right? So and obviously it works. But then here's the fossil evidence, getting into that, and here's the stuff where I go into the dogs. Which actually, one thing I wanted to mention is that when I was having him take the phylogenetic test, the phylogeny challenge, I started with a husky and a wolf. And, like, are these animals, do they share a common ancestor?
Come
And he's
on.
like, well, sure, of course. And then I show him the evidence that dogs and wolves, share a common ancestor. This is a paper that was published in 2005 where they published the dog genome. And then I switched out the husky with this stupid looking pug.
Which is the same, which, to be clear, is the same species.
Yes,
the same
exactly.
species.
It is as similar to wolves as a husky is.
Yep.
Yes. So sure, but then but that, of course,
But then
like,
the coyote.
that's the other thing to highlight is that look, this is just because animals are genetically similar doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to look the same. If they are under similar selection pressures, then yes, they're going to look similar. Compare a coyote to a wolf, or if you go to the golden jackal, right? Like they right. Canids evolved for a reason, right? Because they occupied a particular niche within an environment that is that they can exploit, and it's very successful in many different kinds of environments, and also it's you can find these kinds of environments on many different continents, so they're successful on other continents, right? It's a successful lifestyle, so that overall morphology can work well. But when you can take a lineage and put it under specific selection pressures and get novelty, and obviously artificial selection is one of the most effective ways of drawing bizarre morphological features out of a common genetic stock, right? So
I think there's a specific thing you did that was really tricky that I loved, because you went through all that and you scroll back up. Yeah, here, go back up a little bit, because you went through all this and you kept going, and then you got into things like the maned wolf, and you talked about some of this other stuff.
Dog,
but then at the end you flipped it around and you're like, by the way, these two things, which actually look very different, are the sister taxa.
Yes, exactly.
And these other things that look the same are
very different,
distant.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That was, so if you go back, you go two more slides down is where you kind of revealed the trick there to this one, right?
That's exactly
because
right.
You had him. He kind of knew he was getting cagey at this part.
Of course he was. Yeah.
And he was like, well, they look the same. They eat the same. They can sometimes interbreed. I don't know if they can interbreed, whatever. Right. And because he always gets hung up on the phrase bring forth, right? If they can bring forth, then they're the same, according to their kind. And so he said, I don't know if they can reproduce or if they could in the past, yada, yada, yada. But you got as close as you're going to get Kent to say, yeah, they're probably the same kind. And then you're like, okay, these two are the most similar compared to all the other ones I showed you, except for domestic dogs and wolves.
Right.
So if those things are the same, then these two things also have to be the same. But now you're contradicting yourself. What are we doing?
Exactly. And then he, because I kept trying to ask him, like, well, do you think that these things share a common ancestor? Like, did the raccoon dog share a common ancestor with the gray wolf and the domestic dog? And he's like, well, I don't know who called it why is it called a raccoon dog? Like, who called it that? And he always likes to do that. Like, they don't care what you call them.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yes, right. We're not. You're getting a little bit sidetracked on what we're actually talking about.
Well,
I don't know if you noticed this, but I specifically cropped them as well, like the main.
Right, so you didn't see the long legs. Yeah, no, it was nicely done. It was very effectively done. I really appreciated that. Yeah, it was designed very precisely to short circuit the typical things that Kent does with that kind of thing.
That was the idea. Yes. And the thing is, like, this is a nice, effective example. There's lots of examples like this. You could find this in just about any group of animals. Like and I had other examples.
Here's from the chat. This is a great example that I always like to keep in my back pocket. Hyenas being feliforms is just delightful because it's great. Like, morphologically, try to figure out where hyenas belong without like very specifically looking at its skeleton. Like, good luck. Like, ecologically, diet, like behaviorally
Yep,
try to figure out what hyenas are. Are they cats or
exactly.
dogs, right?
There's
Without
only
specifically,
certain very specific skeletal features that you can point to in the hyena
yeah,
that would clearly show that it's a feliform, and that
yeah,
auditory bula is one of the big things. So the chamber that's underneath the skull, in feliforms it's dual chambered, and in caniforms, which includes the canids, is just single chambered. Both are relatively complex, but it's dual chambered in feliforms, and hyenas have a dual chambered auditory bula. So yeah, and there are a few other things, but there are a lot of other things that they that are typical of feliforms that they're missing. Like they do not have retractable claws. They actually have very solid claws like the other caniforms. And that's because of their lifestyle. Like they
yeah.
do not, they're not like what
They're
would you
not
call it?
solitary ambush
Yes,
hunters. They're pack
solitary ambush
hunters.
hunters
They're
who, like who pounce upon their prey and in order to claw them down and grab them as quickly as possible. They're pursuit type animals, like dogs. And so of course they don't need retractable claws.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so. I was reading the chat here. Now I love that other people are now suggesting other such groups that we can use to that same effect, which is
Good.
great. I love crowdsourcing this because, as you all know, one of the things that I try to do here is I want to give everybody, ammunition that you can use when this stuff comes up, and it is just delightful for me when the people in the chat are doing it for each other, just throwing out examples where there's those clear boundaries that creationists say are clear boundaries, as Kent loves to say. Just ask a 5-year-old and they'll tell you what kind it is. Okay, let's go with that. Let's see if that actually holds up. And the answer is no. Right. It does not, which I love.
Another thing that I like to do, just and this is something that I also touched on in the debate, but I can show this. Get my screen up here.
Here, before we go to your screen, I just want to say,
sure.
First of all, Formula One dog racing. Thank you. That's please tell me you made that right now. But then hyena, what if bear dog, but actually cat kind? Yes, that's basically that's
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
So one thing about so it's great to look for the sister species that are radically different. That's one thing that you can use as an example of debunking some aspects of young Earth creationism. But convergent evolution is another great example, and that's what I was trying to do here. So this is actually I would have changed this, and I kind of ran out of time before the debate, and I wasn't too sure if I was going to be bringing it up. But then he did touch on common descent versus common design arguments to explain why the canids, they would all be, or carnivores would all be genetically similar to each other. One argument that creationists will often say is like, well, obviously they have a common designer. That I never understood that. Like, why would that mean that they would have similar underlying genetic structure? But I think what they're trying to say is that they're using the same parts. Like if you have like a dog and a cat, well, obviously they're similar to each other. They're both carnivores, as all carnivores are. So a designer might take carnivore-like genes to build a cat, and then a dog, and then a mongoose, and a vervet, and a civet. Like all the different groups of carnivores, and they're of course they're going to be similar because they do have similar features. But there are animals out there that look an awful lot like carnivores, but they're not.
They're not.
This is not a carnivore here. Do you know what this is?
I don't know what that is. No.
No, this is a Tasmanian devil.
That's a Tasmanian devil.
Yes.
I'm used to looking at Tasmanian devils with tumors on their faces because that's one of the things that I cover in transmissible cancers. Yeah, that's a Tasmanian devil. That's a marsupial.
It's a marsupial. So it is more similar to, and this is the Tasmanian tiger, which is unfortunately now extinct. Probably it might be coming back, which is interesting. They're talking about this might be one of the animals that they to regrow. But if you compare the Tasmanian wolf, so it is sequenced though, and we do have some of its information is available on NCBI. But if you just compare some of its genes to other marsupials, obviously it's going to be more similar to that. But these marsupials look, well, of course, this one looks a little bit more like a but these don't. Obviously, this is the marsupial mole. If you had like, if I wish what I would have changed is I should have done like a kangaroo and a koala, some of the more obvious marsupials.
Yeah,
Um,
this gets it across though,
yes,
because a mole
yes,
morphologically is so different and
yes,
ecologically is so
exactly.
different. The fact
Yes,
that they're more genetically similar, and
yes,
the marsupial mole is very distant from the star-nosed mole and all the
mhm,
other
yes.
actual moles.
That's right, exactly. And this came from a discussion that I had with Sal Cordova, where I walked him through this issue about like
Yes.
common descent, common design, and how you might explain like the fact of convergent evolution sort of debunking this issue. The thing is, and one reason why we both agree that you cannot necessarily just use morphology, especially in just a general sense, as a way of determining taxonomy just on its own. That instead, really, genetics should be the thing that trumps just basic morphology. It's because of convergent evolution that you can have very similar environments in totally different lineages over a long period of time, resulting in very similar kinds of morphologies. And that's clearly what happened with the Tasmanian wolf versus like the canids in America. That they look similar because there's going to be like a very similar kind of niche because of similar overall ecologies and environments that they're in. I mean, it's inevitable, and we see that's why we see examples of convergent evolution over and over again. But the great thing about this is that if you also compare it with, you just illustrate with the overall genetics, when they talk about common descent and common design, and that a common designer, therefore you're going to have common genetics, this totally debunks it. Convergent evolution completely debunks it, because there'd be no reason why a designer would take say kangaroo genes and marsupial mole genes and the short tail opossum genes to make a Tasmanian wolf. Why wouldn't he use the genes of a dog and a wolf or a bear or a fox?
That all look the same,
Yeah,
have the same morphology, occupy the
exactly.
same ecological niche. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And yep. And the kicker for this, especially because you have different variant, you get the old Earth, you get the young Earth versions. The young Earthers have an additional problem with this because the old Earthers can at least say, like, they'll give, kind of lip service to saying, I don't have a problem with common descent. I just think there's been, design along the way. The young Earthers can't get away with that. So you have to explain why these things that are unrelated are more similar to each other than like you have to explain why things that are very different from each other, that according to the design would be very different designs, but genetically they're more similar,
Yes.
compared to things that ecologically and morphologically are more similar, but genetically are more distinct and are
Mhm.
related to things that are, or when I say related, I mean more similar
Similar.
to
Yes.
genetically,
Exactly.
ecologically, and morphologically things that are very different from them, right?
Yes.
You have to explain, like, if you're a young earther, these numbers you cannot explain outside of God did it that way.
Yep.
Or the other thing you can go with, and I always encourage creationists to go with this if they want, ongoing divine intervention guiding evolution since the flood in real time. If you want to say that there's ongoing intervention, be my guest. I'm happy to have you make that argument.
Honestly, I don't know why they
Fine with me.
don't. I mean, obvious, like there are miracles that have to be a part of the. I know that they're so reticent to invoke miracles, but I mean, like the origin of Adam and Eve, like literally, God is forming them out of, well,
Yeah.
Adam out of dust and making Eve out of his rib. Like these are clearly miracles. Like, why not just have them like?
This is what I've been saying for a while, like with the heat problem and biogeography after the flood and everything, like
Yeah,
the whole thing, top to bottom, miracles. Like that, how did that happen? It's a miracle.
why not?
Like the whole thing
Yes,
was miraculous. And just
right.
put all of your miracles, like I think they should literally just put all of their miracles in one boat.
Yep, sure.
There you go.
Literally in
And the
one boat.
whole thing, right. And the whole thing, top to bottom, the
Solve the
heat
heat problem.
dissipation, the species radiation afterwards, like all of it, all miracles. And it just solves so many problems. And if they're willing to bend the translations a little bit and say the ark landed on Kilimanjaro, you also solve the human biogeography problem with the genetics. If you put ark in sub-Saharan Africa.
Do any of them do that?
No, but they totally should.
But that would make more sense if they did.
No, that's a freebie. Because then they don't have to play the stupid game with out of Middle East instead of out of Africa. If you just say that, because look, the whole geography changed, right? They do all this stuff with the continents were different before the flood and everything.
Right.
So like, we don't know where
Make it a
stuff was.
miracle. Yeah.
Just put the ark on Kilimanjaro. It solves so many problems. The ark landed on Kilimanjaro. Done. Solves so many problems. Creationists. I'm telling you, I've been saying this for years. Someone pick it up. Just do it.
Yeah. You already have enough miracles already. Like, why not just make it all miracles?
And then you can say, like, whatever, the person who's the closest to actually doing this is, I'm loath to give this person any credit at all. God help me, Nathaniel Jeanson is the closest to this because his model is called the CHNP model. It's the Created Heterozygosity and Natural Processes model. And if you read Replacing Darwin, and I'm one of the 12 people who has read Replacing Darwin cover to cover, took notes, highlighted very carefully, there's a bit in that book where he's explaining this, and he sneaks a little line in there, basically saying something to the effect of, recognize that God continues to influence events. And it's like, okay, so it's ongoing, is what you're saying. It's not just set it and forget it. It's an ongoing thing. And okay, fair.
It's
fair enough.
So core to so much of their mythology anyway. I mean, if you include things like speaking in tongues and handling snakes and these kinds of things, I mean, they still believe that there is miraculous intervention happening today. So why not and just make it the whole thing? I mean, we know why. It's because they want to. Obviously, if you just make it all miracles, well, then they're giving up the game of having this to be a scientific alternative,
right?
And then so much of this just stems from the Supreme Court case, I think in 1983, where scientific creationism was.
It was 87 Edwards v. Aguilar.
87.
Yeah,
that's right. That's it.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly. And so they can walk up to that line, but then there's stuff that they can't say was miraculous. Yeah, they have to say geology explains this. Right. Yeah.
That's right. And the hangover then of the intelligent design movement kind of infected the young earth creationist movement too, where they felt like, well, we have to also sort of prove everything from an utterly scientific method where we do not invoke miracles and that kind of thing. Which is crazy for young earth creationists to do that, because obviously there are miracles. There have to be. These are miracles.
That's part of the point.
Yes, that's it. Exactly. Just make it all miracles. Anytime you have a problem, just add a miracle.
But just be honest about it. Just be honest about it, right? And then so we did get another super chat in here from Rashina, who's very generous. Thank you, Rashina. I appreciate you being here. Rashina, pre-Yiddish uranium decay. Don't even ask where that name comes from, folks. It would take way too long to explain it. For 199, morphology is the prediction, genetics is the test. I like that. I like that a lot. The way I say something similar in class is that every phylogenetic tree is a hypothesis. And every time we sequence something new, we are testing that hypothesis. We're just always testing and evaluating and revising every time we get new data.
Yeah, exactly. And prior to having easy access to genetic sequencing, we had to rely upon the fossil record and morphology more to make those taxonomic relationships. But even then, it was well understood that okay, well, this is somewhat tenuous. We're doing the best that we can, and that it's every phylogenetic tree is simply a hypothesis that gets strengthened over and over with more and more evidence. And that's the thing, though. I do feel like you say genetics absolutely, and the way Rashina put it is that's going to be the gold standard that we're going to use to form these relationships and to support the fact that the conclusion that these relationships really exist. And everything, obviously this is the thing, it's so clear now, especially now that we can do whole genomes. Back in the day when it would take years to sequence, cytochrome B and in a few different animals and it would take years to do this to compare 6 different animals. Now it can be done in a day, and just cytochrome B. But like, if you needed the entire genome, you could do that in a few months for sure.
Now it's really fast. I mean, when I was in
I'm
grad
talking
school,
about multiple species with multiple individuals, and to do all the work to compare them, months.
That takes time. Yeah.
Yes.
Just getting the DNA sequences though is remarkably fast now.
Yes, remarkably fast.
It's basically magic. It's incredible.
Right.
I was about to say something, and I foolishly did not write it down a moment ago, as I was like, oh, I here's the thing. Here's what it was. There's an old blog, and I forget which blog it was. It was way back in, it was 20 years ago on, science blogs and before like PepsiGate and everything. If you know what I'm saying, congratulations. You're way too deep into this. Don't worry about it. But it was somebody on there was like, you know what? Let's say we somehow got to DNA sequencing and nobody had figured out evolution. We somehow got to like the 21st century, evolution's not a thing. As soon as we sequenced the genomes and found endogenous retroviruses, everyone all at the same time would have gone evolution. Everybody, and that's it. And I want to say, God bless you. You tried to explain this to Kent. You tried to explain the if you don't have a common ancestor, it doesn't form the nice hierarchy thing. You tried to like make that point to him, and I think you, me, our friends in the chat right now, I think we all recognize the futility of trying to explain anything related to like molecular genetics and molecular phylogenetics to Kent. It is not getting through. It's not happening.
Do you want to look at a clip? Because I have a link.
Yeah, let's see that clip. I want to see that.
Well,
here. So
I'm gonna get the file.
Here you go. You tell me the time.
1:53:40. This is where Kent clearly does not understand how heritable traits work.
All right, 1:53. Here we go. So we're going to start it right here. Let me just make sure the sound is okay. No, the sound is not okay. Hang on.
Oh, Kent, just one sec.
Oh, there we go.
If you could backtrack me 10 seconds.
Okay. I'll answer the last part first. I don't believe it was a miracle.
Hang on. The question on screen reads, question to the young Earth creationists here genuinely, how did rapid speciation occur post-flood with each kind naturally? Was it a miracle? That's the question. That's the question he's answering.
Because it can all be explained by genetic diversity in the original code. And I think Chris is very wrong that it can't happen in one generation. One human couple could have theoretically 50 kids. And they could all be very different, very different. So I think we see there is already genetic diversity in one man and one.
Huh? Oh, look at your face.
Yeah, where he's like, and they can all be very different. I'm like, what?
Can they?
Have you ever seen like a big family? Like, that's not how heredity works.
Woman producing different children. One man.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, play it.
All right.
And one woman can have a blonde child, a brunette child, and a redhead child, if it's in the gene code. So I think the genetic code is mind-boggling in its complexity, and I think God ought to get the glory for what he made, not Charlie Darwin or a rock or anything else. So I think God ought to get the glory. He made.
It's so stupid.
If you read a transcript of just the question and that answer, and just no context, just like this is a creationist answering this question with nothing else, like, what are you supposed to do other than just laugh at that? Like, there's nothing.
Right. He clearly does not understand how heritable traits work. Obviously, he does not understand that.
Well, do you know? Have you ever seen the clip of him explaining how recombination works? Have you seen this?
Yes, I have.
The thing that broke my brain.
Yes, I know.
He thinks, folks.
Talk about it.
If you don't know this, he thinks that the way, like, during he doesn't know what the word meiosis means, but he thinks that the way it works is that you have mom's DNA and dad's DNA, and the double helix unwinds, and then half of mom's and half of dad's hybridize together into a new hybrid double helix. And then, like, so this is like from an old video of his, and he says this, and I saw that clip for the first time on a live stream, and it broke my brain. And then a couple of years later, I asked him, Kent, how does recombination work? And he doubled down on that mechanism of recombination. And like, what are you supposed to do in that situation? There's nothing any of us could say that's going to fix that. That's just my one regret of that moment is it was on SFT, and I should have said timeout, timeout, timeout. Donnie, what do you think?
Yeah,
sure. Is what I should have done.
Yeah.
But I was laughing too hard.
I give Donnie credit. I think that, I mean, he obviously, there's young Earth creationism suffers from Dunning-Kruger, and I hate to blame Dunning-Kruger because it's almost like a cliche at this point, but it obviously does, and certainly there's some of that with Donnie, but he would have to know that at least the way recombination works.
Maybe
not.
I think maybe. I think he does. I don't know, but then I don't know because he doesn't know the difference between a bottleneck and a founder event. So like I don't know. Maybe he doesn't. Who knows?
Fair.
I don't know.
Let's see. So another thing, if we wanted to go to another part where we were talking about the fossil record. This is again in the question and answer session 20739.
All right.
And so the question here.
Okay, here we go. Kent should give humans more credit in our ability to name animals. After all, that was the one job Adam was given in his own pre-fall worldview. That's true. That's true. All right. So what did we get here?
I think the conversation got off of this topic though. But
let's see so how long should I let it go for? You just
want to it's not for too long, but like about a minute. Yeah.
Give me a timeout when we're ready to.
I will. Yeah.
There's some similarities in their body structure. And
the genetics and the biogeography and the fossil evidence. There's a lot of things that show that cats and dogs share a common ancestor.
Okay. There is no such thing as a fossil record. All you know is when you find a fossil, all you know is it died.
Oh, here we go.
You can't prove it had children that were different. You have to imagine that it had children that were different.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, honestly. And I'm sorry to be so pedantic, but honestly, that is so stupid. Like you always say that about like, oh, if you find a fossil, how do you know that it had a baby? That doesn't matter. Like we can talk about it obviously came from a population of animals. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a fossil. And
how do you know that? You're avoiding Your Honor, he's avoiding the question. Okay. How do you know that one had babies?
What difference does it make? It's from a population of similar animals. That's the thing.
You're making a claim that you don't have any idea. How do you know anyone?
You're right.
If you find 10,000
the one
fossils.
hyenodon that we find in a particular site in the steppes of Asia was the only one that existed, and it just happened to be like plopped into existence, and there was no parent or offspring of the entire population.
Okay, Chris, I'll give you
absurd. It's utterly absurd. If I find a cat skeleton out in the woods, am I going to say like, oh well, how do I even know cats even had birth to other cats? Like I know there are populations of cats. If I see the skeleton of a cat, it's obviously part of a species, and that there are going to be more examples of it.
Well, you don't know. You can't prove that either. But I'll give you 10,000 hyena skeletons. You find 10,000 hyena skeletons in the dirt. You don't know that any of those had children. That you certainly don't know they had children that were different. What we see today, hyenas have baby hyenas. Now, if you wish to imagine, they came from something else.
You can go to a cemetery and you can dig up thousands of human skeletons. How do you know any of them had babies?
You don't. You know they died. Right. You can't prove from a skeleton it had any babies.
That's why this is so stupid.
Okay, we can
stop.
Yeah, that's extremely instructive of just like how Kent approaches this whole thing. And to the point where you gave him the most obvious hypothetical and he just was like, no, just no. You don't know. You don't know cats exist. You don't know cats exist is what his argument came down to is you don't actually know cats exist.
That's exactly right. Yes. Other than that, you have that skeleton and that's the only thing that you know.
Yeah.
So we can't possibly draw the conclusion that this is an animal that's part of a population of similar animals. It's also then a member of a species and therefore like just like all other animals that we know exist in the world, that it would have to be part of an existing population. And that he thinks that like just because we can't prove that a particular fossil specimen gave birth to offspring, that therefore how do we even know that it had any descendants whatsoever? Is just
or any other individuals I don't even like you said, like your response on that was just like, this is dumb. Like, I don't have to say anything serious. Like, that's just dumb, and everyone can see that that's dumb. And this, I think, actually gets at one of the big points I want to emphasize about not just what Kent is doing here. I'm going to take the screen down so we can talk. This gets at like possibly the big idea about what Kent is engaged in and what anybody who's going to, I won't say converse with, because you can't talk to an inanimate object, but you can, it's like conversing with a television that's on. You can't do it. But if you're going to engage in this type of thing with Kent, you have to recognize that what he's doing is not debating. He's not making an argument. He's not doing science communication. He is preaching is the thing that he is engaged in. So when you get something like that, he has the thing that he goes back to. And even in just a couple of clips we watched, right? Hyenas only give birth to hyenas. How do you know a fossil had kids? Yet, like, you can see exactly what the beats are. And once you reframe how you approach it as this is a preacher preaching, rather than this is a science communicator debating science, a lot of things make sense about what he's doing, right? Then it's about the repetition. It's about kind of instilling these very clear, in other contexts, we might call them mantras or chants or whatever, but it's just these very simple, repetitious statements that anybody who watches him a couple of times can recall. And if you want to get a feel for Kent and the degree to which he is just going to say the same thing, independent of what's going on, here's a game you can play. Clip out the first 3 minutes of any 5, 10, 20 random Kent debates. And based on those first 3 minutes of his opening statement in each of those debates, try to guess what the topic is. Just try to guess what the topic of that debate is, whether it's carnivores or the ark or macroevolution or evolution and creationism, or is evolution a reasonable theory, or
Big Bang.
Right, is the Big Bang real? Yeah. Just watch and you'll see that it doesn't matter. He will say the same thing over and over again because he is not doing science communication. He is preaching. And it's really easy to spot that with Kent. People who are trying to be more subtle about it are more subtle about it, but they're doing the same thing. And if you watch, for example, Standing for Truth, other than the debates that he moderates, you watch when he's doing a thing with Raw Mat, or you watch their premieres rather than their live shows, it is word for word the same thing. And those videos, when he's talking about mitochondrial Eve, the mother of us all, and uniparentally inherited DNA compartments with fast mutation rates, right? Those are not science communication videos. Those are sermons that are being broadcast on YouTube. It is the same thing as what Kent is doing. It's just, more technologically savvy. It's more subtle, but it is the same thing. And everybody needs to recognize that when you're engaging in this realm, it's not one science communicator disagreeing about science with another science communicator. It's one science communicator talking to someone preaching a sermon.
Mm-hmm. And they all do it. I mean, Rob Carter is similar too. He obviously is intelligent and he knows a lot of the underlying science, but he abuses it in his certain way. And but if you listen to his talks, it's very sermony in many ways.
There's very much a rhythm to these, and once it's one of those things that once you notice it, you can't unhear it.
Right.
And another one you can do is there's this great channel that if you are an absolute glutton for punishment, you can go back through and find Dwayne Gish's debates. Dozens of them are now on YouTube, at least the audio. Most of them only have audio. A few have video. And if you listen to Dwayne Gish, he really has that rhythm of almost like a stereotypical Southern preacher. He really has that cadence to the way he makes his arguments and does his opening statements. And the funny thing is, once you listen to Gish, because he was really big in the 70s and the 80s, and then kind of tapered off in the 90s. So there was some more recent stuff. And so Kent half a generation younger than him in terms of doing this, it is very clear once you listen to Dwayne Gish that Kent is just doing a really bad Dwayne Gish impersonation.
Oh, for sure.
Kent is doing, I want a Dwayne Gish debate. No, honey, we have Dwayne Gish debates at home, and it's just Kent on SFT. Like, that's what he is doing, and he doesn't do it as well, but that's what he is doing. And anybody doing this, like you said a little while ago, if you're going to do this with Kent, you need to be prepared, because it's not just enough to know the science. You need to know what they're going to say and how to either interrupt that or turn that back on them.
Yes. And it's not hard, because oftentimes these guys end up saying the same thing over and over again. And so you just have to do the work to know what they're going to say.
You have to do your homework.
I actually had an opportunity to see Dwayne Gish give a
Did you really?
Yes. So this was back in my days in Seattle when I was a graduate student. He gave it was in a high school gymnasium, and it was packed. I mean, it was just full. It was on a Sunday, so some church had rented it out. And yeah, like he had that rhythm. And I mean, there's a reason why his name is like an adjective for a debate style.
Yeah.
That, like, outside of young earth creationism, like, it's widely used in debate circles.
Yeah, and and I will say, just so the Gish Gallop, that term has actually, I'm astonished about this. The term Gish Gallop has crossed over out of not just creationism and not just debates. It is now a mainstream thing where it was last summer. I was listening to a politics podcast, and the host was like, so I recently learned this is a thing called a Gish Gallop. And I'm like, welcome to the party, pal. Like, yes, this is a thing.
It's a thing. And he was a master at it.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, for those who don't know, I mean, obviously, just about everyone in your audience certainly knows this, but the Gish Gallop is where you overwhelm your interrogator with just a litany of complaints and points that they simply cannot answer all of them. And because it takes 10 times as long to debunk a claim than to just make the claim. So if you make 50 different claims, you do not have enough time to answer all of them. And so he can just say that he won just by default. And he was really, really good at it. I got to go and listen to them, because I've never actually listened to any of his debates. I just got to see a presentation.
You don't need to as someone who listened to approximately 15 or 20 of them, you don't need to listen to that many. Once you've heard 3 or 4, you're good. They're all the same.
Yeah, because he has a rhythm and a thing. He's got a sermon that he does. He was a traveling preacher, basically, and he would just do that, but he would put on a show by getting one of the local collegiate professors or some sort of scientist who knew their topic but wouldn't know all of like what you would need to know in order to defend evolution. And I could just that's the key. It is to listen to.
So here's how I want to, on that note, I want to start to kind of wrap this up a little bit. And here's the key that I want to convey to everybody here. Dr. Chris and I did a prep. We did a little preparation talking about how to approach debating Kent prior to our stream, which again, that's on Chris's channel. That's linked down below. The debate also broadcast on Chris's channel is linked down below. Prior to when we talked, you had already done a ton of prep work, getting slides together, getting figures together. And as you showed us a little while ago, not just your opening statement, but also a bunch of contingency things that, like, if this comes up, I've got this. If this comes up, I've got that. And not just like the information, but a specific flow to it to guide the discussion the way you want to do it. That is how you have to approach these things. If you go in just, well, I have the facts and I know the facts, you're going to get your butt kicked because you're not prepared for that specific approach to doing this thing. They're not going to come into it. It's not like, a graduate seminar where you're going to disagree over this or that and show your figures with your error bars. It's a very specific skill, really, a very specific practice of being able to engage in this. So, if you are going to do it, which I encourage, I have done a 180 on this. They're out there, they have the platform. It is incumbent upon people who are willing to do it to step up and be in the room to show how they're wrong. if you are going to be one of those people, for God's sake, you better be prepared.
Yep.
Like, because bad is they do it unchallenged. Good is they're challenged by someone who does a good job. Worst is they're challenged by someone who does a bad job.
Exactly.
Right.
It gives them then credibility. Yep.
Yeah. And then they get those clips they just throw those everywhere. Right. It's bad. So if you are going to do this, make sure you do what Dr. Chris did and you are prepared for it. You go in with a plan and you execute that plan and knock them off their script. Because whether it's Kent or Donnie or, since you mentioned Rob Carter, right, they're always going to have the thing that they say in the way that they say it. Know what that is, know how to get around it or knock it, into some other territory. It's important that people do this, but man, you got to be prepared to do it.
Yep.
Like we saw here.
Exactly. And just to follow up on exactly what you're saying, absolutely, you have to know what they're going to say. You have to know what their arguments are, but go in with a plan to take control of the conversation.
Yes.
And know that like you also have to be nimble enough to sort of switch gears, because if they bring up something, well, then change that topic, kind of follow it a little bit, because you need to be a little gracious. You can't just like have absolute control over the conversation. You want to have as much control as possible, but be nimble enough to then be prepared for that kind of conversation as well. And you only get that if you know the kinds of things that they talk about.
Yeah,
and
you're gonna know that. You're gonna know the beats so that you can then kind of go three steps in one jump.
That's why I'd organize my slides in that way so that I could switch to some topic. I would have this like big, just a word that would dictate. Okay, this is now I'm in the bear section, the common design section, the genetic section. He would bring up something about fossils. I could switch to that section. It's a lot of work. It's annoying, but it's important. But also, like, all right, now I'm gonna like use some of this material and clip it out and make additional videos. And like, if this is something that I want to do and promote, it's not wasted work either. So
no, it's useful because now you have this ready to go, and now you've done it. You have the materials. You can just say, here it is. Right. Here you go. Now I don't have to do it again.
Put it out into the world.
Here it is. Yeah.
Folks.
Dr. Chris Thompson debated Kent Hovind, and we just spent time, like an hour and a half, talking about it. It was a whole thing.
This is much more pleasurable than actually debating Kent Hovind.
Well, yeah, because then you feel icky afterwards, because it's that guy. So thank you a ton for coming on here. I want to remind everybody that if you go down in the description, there are several videos linked that are on Chris's channel. You should watch those. You should like them. You should subscribe to his channel. I think, if I recall, you are not that far from 1,000 subscribers, so let's do it, folks.
I'm past 1,000.
Oh, never mind.
At 2,700.
Oh, well, let's hit
past 1,000.
Let's hit 3,000 then. Let's hit 3,000. I can't keep track of who's ready. Let's hit 3,000 then. Let's do it, folks.
I would appreciate that. Yeah.
So, do you have anything coming up? You got other debates coming up? I know you have at least one debate coming up.
Yes, with Jerry Bergman, is that his name?
Dr. Jerry Bergman.
Yes, you just debated him, so that is not on the calendar yet, I don't think. But I'm in discussions with Donnie on getting that established on like what we're actually going to talk about. I think it'll be the same topic that you guys were supposed to talk about, which is common descent versus common design. You didn't actually end up discussing it.
He just went, we did half the debate on that. And then he was like, okay, let's talk about all this other stuff. And
all this other stuff.
But he agreed with me first. So I was like, all right, I'll talk about the other stuff too.
Right. Yeah. Right. So good enough. Right. So, but we'll see. I also, in addition to dissecting the Hovind carnivore debate a little bit more, I'm in the process of breaking apart that work that I did into digestible units. They're going to be like short videos to hit on points about carnivore evolution and debunking specific aspects of young earth creationism. That's going to be a series of things coming out. And I'm also working on a video on fluoridation. Which is going to be something that we'll have to be discussing over the next couple of weeks.
We're all of us anti-creationists are going to be branching out into all the craziest nonsense. We're going to be doing, vaccine stuff and water fluoridation. And I mean, I'm doing a show in a couple weeks with Jordan from Reason to Doubt about trans issues. Like it is incumbent upon us who are doing this to
Yeah.
cover our bases a little bit and
Yes.
learn about other issues that are not necessarily specifically our field, because
That's right.
in case you haven't noticed, folks, basic facts are under assault. So
really
we are going to deal with it. And there was a few weeks ago, I released a video very simply called "Trans Women Are Women," and somebody in my comments was very upset that I had the nerve to abandon the science and get political on my channel, to which I just want to remind everybody, this entire endeavor that we're doing here is political.
Yep.
Conveying science communication is a political endeavor. If you get mad at me for talking about science other than like the nonsense that Kent Hovind talks about, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not keeping it a secret what I'm doing over here.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
Here we are, folks.
Right. Yes.
I
mean, we're not, this isn't just simple science communication just for science sake. That's part of it, of course. Like I am a huge supporter of good science and making sure and to educate people and to make sure that like what we know about the world at the state of the science is like understood by as many people as possible. But there are actors out there who are trying to undermine that whole understanding of that worldview of use of the scientific method and rationality to draw conclusions. And science is a big part of how we make political decisions, and this is part of it. So,
yeah, this is exactly right. What's the scientist version of shut up and dribble? Yeah, basically, right? Like, stay in your lane, don't talk about that. No,
right.
screw,
Get
like,
back to the bench.
Yeah, right. No, I'm going to talk about that other stuff, because that other stuff is also, it also matters.
Sure.
And like, also, don't get mad at me. I'm going to, chat, you're being fantastic right now. You're just taking words right out of my mouth and putting them in the chat here. So let me just show this from Dr. Dino. I would say science has been made political. Yeah, we don't want to have to deal with this nonsense.
True. Yes.
I wouldn't, like, why did I make that video? Because the very existence of trans people is under assault right now. So like, that's what we're going to talk about, folks. We're being made to deal with this stuff. And I'm just wondering if, obviously I'm going to have some vaccine stuff coming up. I'm just wondering if I'm going to have to do chemtrail stuff this year. Like, let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? Let's see how far it goes. Friends, thank you all for being here for this. I have a couple fun things coming up. So next week, I have deja vu all over again. I have a video on Discovery Institute and junk DNA, because long story short, did a video on junk DNA. What year is it? Is it 2024? No, do not adjust your television. It is actually 2025. We are doing this again. The dude showed, it's like some of the same graphs. Like, so we're doing it again. So I
like the original. I can't wait to see the second version.
This one was going to start as just like a real quick drive-by of like, they're not saying anything new. You could just see that it's all hollow. And then I went through and took notes on it, and now it's 37 minutes long. So
of course,
that's next week.
How that works.
We're going to do that. And then I'll also have a response within the next week or two after that will be a response to Rob Carter, because we're friends now, and I did a thing, and then he did a thing, and now I'm going to do a thing in response to his thing. And I did just a real quick preview of it the other day, because something related came up when I was hanging out with Grayson and Mark Reed over on Grayson's channel, Grayson Hawk. If anyone's not subscribed to Grayson, go check him out. He does great work. And it kind of, there's a little hint in there about something that's going to come up with the Carter thing that I'm excited for. Cool. And so see if you can, I said this in that short little preview, see if you can figure out what it is, folks. I bet some of you can figure out exactly what the problem is. And then I'm going to rebroadcast the Bergman debate. I've got something in the works on hyperspeciation. I'm going to do a video basically using my opening of the Bergman debate as kind of a standalone thing. I'm going to tweak that a little bit. So I've got a bunch of fun stuff coming up, and it's scheduled. I got a bunch of things basically through February are scheduled. So with that, everybody, please remember to like and subscribe here. Please remember to go over there and also like things and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for being here. Hope everybody stays healthy. Keep your heads up and just hang in there, folks. We're going to be fine. Just hang in there and keep doing your thing.
That's true.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.